music.
Oh.
Oh.
I think we know.
Oh. And they made it even louder. Fake out.
I don't think.
Can we get a round of applause for the enforcers? They have been killing it this con. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Art of Feedback panel. How's everyone doing? How's your PAX? All right, I know it's Monday. I know you guys are tired. We're tired too. But I see a bunch of smart, attractive, and awesome people out there. And if there are people outside who want to know that there are smart, awesome, and attractive people in here doing fun things, then you should probably make a slightly better noise when I ask, how's everyone's PAX going today? All right, the first thing on my list was warm up the crowd. Check. My name is Nick Davidson. I will be your moderator today. I've been making games as long as there have been PAXs, plus about 4 years. You do the math. MMOs like Asheron's Call, Lord of the Rings Online. I've worked on Marvel Snap, Pokemon, Magic, a bunch of different things. And I'm here with these lovely feedback professionals who are going to tell you about themselves in this order and not slide order, starting with Faye Vizentainer.
Hi, everybody. My name is Faye. I am the community manager at Fantastic Pixel Castle, working on the MMO codenamed Ghost, where I get to meme game development within an inch of its life. It's one of the joys of my career. Before that, I was one of the community managers on Palia, and before that, I was at the Pokemon Company. So I've been kind of all over the place. I'm sort of obsessed with player feedback. I'm a very strong believer in really good game development being a partnership between players and developers. So I'm excited to share that with you and talk with you about that today.
Hi, my name is Angelo. I'm Senior Corporate Counsel at Xbox Game Studios. So right now I'm working with 343 Industries, the Coalition, and Ninja Theory. In the past, I've worked at Bandai Namco, Google, YouTube, assorted other small, studios. I've actually got my start in working with indie game developers, so that's still near and dear to my heart. And I guess I'm here to provide the perspective from the legal department as far as player feedback goes, what we do and don't accept and why.
So hello, my name is Lisa Trott. You'll have to excuse my voice because I've been talking to a lot of people at PAX this weekend. So my register is a lot lower than it usually is, you can hear that. I've been working in the games industry for about 15 years. I am one of those weirdos who has persisted despite the state of it. I have had the very good fortune of working for some incredible companies in both the games and the TTRPG space. I've worked for Xbox, I've worked for Nintendo of America, I've worked for, most recently, Ubisoft, and also, please pour one out for my former employer, Humble Games. So I have always... Thank you. I have always worked in customer and player-centric jobs. I have done customer service, I have done player support, I have done customer service in non-games industry roles. So I have always put players and customer experience at the center of everything that I do, and I take that with me now into being a brand manager for video games.
I like your jazzy kind of...
I'm smoking 40 a day for this in the future.
I like it. Hi, everyone. I'm Jackie Cole. I have worked in community capacities across many areas of entertainment. I like to say I made my bones in board games, tabletop RPGs, like Lisa, starting at Geek and Sundry, where we did videos to help teach people how to play board games. From there, moved into games like 505, also colleagues with Faye over at Palia, as well as DC Entertainment, helping them to launch their first owned and operated communities. So been able to see the commonalities of how we manage feedback across different sectors, and really excited to be here where board games and video games all live together. So, yeah.
Hi, I'm Victoria Tran. I need to explain my headshot. I forgot to send one. They asked for it, and then I was like, oh, haha, it'd be funny if I sent this, and then I forgot to send the actual one, so that's mine. I'm the communications director for Among Us, again, explaining the headshot. And yeah, I've always worked in indies. Before that, I have helped games like Unpacking, Dwarf Fortress, Boyfriend Dungeon. I've always just been in indie games and have read a lot of feedback, and maybe that's why I sent that image. That's how I feel.
All right, we're going to break this into 2 sections. I know this is really a groundbreaking format. We're going to discuss for a little while, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A. I know, very innovative. One thing I do want to put out there before we get started, all of us listed some very cool companies and very cool projects that we've worked upon, and we've signed a bunch of very cool NDAs. So when it comes to games that are specifically in our past, the more specific it is about that, the less likely we are to be able to answer, and the more likely we are to cry afterwards. And I think we're pretty nice people, so please don't make us cry.
I'm going to start putting "we will be very sad" at the end of all of my contracts.
Yeah, yeah.
As long as you list me as, like as
as a
a
co-contributor.
cite me.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Good.
Yeah.
And we wanted to kick it off with maybe the best Steam review of all time, because feedback takes many, many forms, even that. I don't like it that much. All right, we're going to kick this off with our first question, and I'm going to launch it to Victoria. When we're talking about player feedback, from inside the studio, how much does that feedback really influence development? How much of that gets seen by developers?
Yeah, so this and every answer I feel will be, it depends. It depends on the studio, it depends on the game. For instance, if you have a game that is much more community focused, you might tend to look at player feedback much more frequently. Not saying that games don't look at player feedback, but it really depends on how they like to design the game, what kind of aspects of the game they're trying to improve or look at. So I can say it does matter, though, to say how you're feeling about the game and what you're doing, because that really helps developers kind of drive the direction of what they want to do, and helps inform their decision better than like if they were just looking inwards without any sort of feedback.
Yeah.
And I guess, are there specific areas of development and development, like developer types, that are most interested in that? And how does that hit various groups? Anyone can jump in. How does it impact legal?
Oh, we might get into that more later.
Yeah, we will.
Right.
I think one thing that is really important to point out is that when you get a survey, like a player survey in your email, that is asking for feedback. That's a company reaching out and saying, like, how have you interacted with this game? What are the things you like to do? How do you use these different features? And survey return rates are often very low, but
Would anyone like to guess what the average percentage of return rate on an emailed survey is?
oh, it's
I've heard anywhere between 1% and 9%, and that's actually about the range that we see. I've never seen a survey cap like 10% unless it's a very, very small group of highly engaged players.
And so,
So-
go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just know everyone's busy, everyone's got a lot going on, and when you get one of these, it's really easy to just toss it. But if you actually do want to give feedback, this is literally the studio asking for it. So this is one of the best ways to provide it. We're much more likely to look at something that is in a survey that we sent out and solicited advice or feedback from than, let's say, very angry tweets to a personal account.
What's sometimes invisible to the audience is whether or not the feedback is on something that is like definitely in development and very, very loose and able to be changed versus things that are pretty core to the established like vision of a game.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any good examples of things?
That's the next question.
Oh,
That's the next question.
oh, hey, look at that.
Natural segue.
I thought I'd hit the button. I had not. All right. So when it comes to feedback that is good, I was about to kick it to Faye, and now I'm going to kick it to Faye. How do I give feedback that will actually be helpful to the development team? We rehearsed, everyone.
Yeah. I think this is really one of the hardest parts of giving feedback because outside of very specific circumstances, a lot of what's being developed or planned for a game is not public because they want to release it and excite and surprise and delight everybody. So it's hard to know if the feedback that you're giving is something that's already planned or is never going to happen. I think the two things to hold in mind, especially if you're invited to playtest a game, which is, a really important feedback giving period, are just the things I keep in mind for myself, at least, are like, is my feedback specific? Which is, I don't like healing, is maybe like less helpful than like the healing class mana regeneration could be tweaked in a different way, or it doesn't work when I'm running or something like that. That's the kind of thing that's maybe a little bit more helpful. And then, am I being realistic for the game that I'm giving this feedback on? Which is like, I'm not gonna go up to Concerned Ape and say, you should take farming out of Stardew Valley. That's not, that's a different game. I'm asking for a different game. So those two things in mind, beyond that though, to me, the sky's the limit. I think hearing anything from players is helpful, because even if it's not something that's gonna be in the game now or isn't feasible right now, maybe it's the kind of thing we can keep and start to work into future plans. That's the kind of thing where I still like to hear what people are saying, especially as a community manager who's really involved in playtests.
Yeah, I think I would say also, while we really appreciate the passion behind long pages of feedback, it's usually easier to digest feedback when it's, let's focus on one suggestion at a time. So if we're able to collect that in surveys, that's really helpful. But even with all of this advice, I think the best thing you can do is just give your feedback. Don't overthink how you're going to do it, because we want it. And what we like to say is that your feedback is a gift. So please, please, please don't stop too long to think, oh, is this the right way to do it? Because that's our job. We're here to figure it out, to dig deeper, and help to articulate and translate that feedback. So go ahead and give it, no matter what form it is.
I fully agree with that, and I will add, most of the time, players give great feedback, but we can't acknowledge that it's great feedback. Or we can't acknowledge your good feedback until so much later and everybody's forgotten. But please know, if you are submitting feedback, we are eternally grateful.
Yes.
Even if we can't say it.
I think one of the things that helps make it good is being pain point focused. There's a quote that's often attributed to Mark Rosewater, head designer on Magic. I think it predates him, but we'll continue with that, which is, when a player tells you what is bothering them, they are always right. And when they tell you what the solution would be, they're almost always wrong. And that's not because players are not smart or don't know games. You absolutely do. But the inherent goals of being a player versus being a developer often have those working at cross purposes, or at least indirectly cross purposes. So the idea of focusing on, like, what is the pain point? What is the discomfort that you're having? And then, like, everyone else is going to look at, what's on the schedule and what's available in terms of resources, and determine, like, what are the solves to that. But if I had one piece of advice about giving feedback, it is to focus more on pain points than solutions.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, but also for feedback, like in my mind, really broadly, I would like split it into three. So you have like bugs, right? You found something that doesn't work. For something like that, it's really nice to hear what you were doing right before that bug. Usually people will just be like, my game crashed. I have no idea what you were doing before the game crashed. If you were like, I was trying to press the emergency meeting button while spamming the spacebar button, I'm like, okay, something has happened there, and we can track that down much more easily. Second, you have something like gameplay feature, and that one is like similar to what they were saying. It's like how you're feeling or your assumptions of like, I thought when I pressed the emergency meeting button, someone would die or something like that. Just knowing what you thought would happen helps us like sort that out. And also if you liked it, if you're like, oh, this felt weird, or I didn't understand like this, and this, that's also very helpful. And the third, which also is very good, is just praise. Feedback for the thing that you like is really, really helpful, because we hear a lot of the bad things, but a lot of the time you need to also hear the good things, because we're like, oh, okay, so we can focus more on this feature, or they love this part of the game. And that is, again, helpful for us to just figure out, all right, where are all the threads going?
The joke with UI development is that your UI is good when people stop talking about it.
It's true.
Yeah.
Good UI, and honestly, like good player moderation. Like if no one notices anything is wrong.
What's that Bender quote from Futurama? If you do everything right, nobody knows you've done anything at all.
Done anything at all.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yep.
All right. Question number 3, how does feedback get to the right people and incorporate it into the development process? Jackie, do you want to kick us off?
Yes. We all like to say that we create feedback loops or feedback pipelines. So how do we get the feedback from the player to the dev and then deliver back to the player what the reactions were to that feedback? And so I think of it in 3 different categories. One is through relationships with the developers, through repetition over time, as well as, of course, documentation, which I'm sure you all hope that we're doing when we get your feedback. But the relationships that we all individually build with developers help that feedback to be more effective. It makes the devs more porous to the feedback because we come to understand what kind of feedback they're looking for, as well as what resonates with them in terms of what features they're working on and what they really want to know so that we can really target making sure that we're translating that feedback effectively. The repetition comes in because not everyone receives feedback or information in the same way. So maybe we'll bring it up in a weekly meeting. Maybe we'll make sure and bring it up in those individual relationships we have with the developers, as well as through the documentation or a weekly report. And when it comes to the documentation, that's where we start to get into this nitty-gritty behind the scenes. We create all these little categories of how often people are talking about it, how severe the issue is, and that comes back to what Victoria said, where then this all depends, because I've been at studios where you can just throw out a Slack message and the developer goes, I'm on it. Or there's other cases where things are more complex. And actually, one of my favorite examples is a system that Faye built over at Singularity 6 for Palia, where we were working with well over 100 developers across different categories. So how do you make sure that you're managing all of these different pieces of feedback across all of these different teams? And she had the brilliant idea of creating systems where the developers already were, which was in a system called Jira, which is where they were managing their priorities, their bug tickets. So by creating this board in Jira, the developers didn't have to switch between different softwares. They could just nimbly transfer across different areas. Anyway, I don't know if there's anything you want to add. I just wanted to brag about you, but yeah.
If you work in Jira, please close your Jira tickets. Please.
Shout out for Jira.
Shout out to Jira. In general, though, I think the reason that Jira worked is because that was the system that our design teams and our developers were used to. So for us, especially if we're kind of working in with the community, our goal is to be where the community is, and then it's also to sort of take that and bring it to where the developers are. So we don't want to ask them to step out of where they're already working and then come to sort of a new program or a new piece of software that they have to learn. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. And then they could also add comments to the Jira board, and then we could take those comments about why or why not they were working on a feature and bring it back to the players. Sometimes we'd stop by legal or, another PR representative along the way to make sure that we were translating it thoughtfully for everyone across the board, which also comes back to what Lisa was saying about, sometimes there's a long delayed reaction to what we can and can't say, but we do try to close that loop.
I was going to say, sometimes, ideally, the feedback doesn't come to me.
Yes, that is the dream.
Write your feedback in a way that it doesn't get routed to legal, that it actually gets routed to the people working on the game itself. But
There's only 2 responses from a legal team, which is, why are you showing me this? And why didn't you show me this 3 days ago?
yeah, I've been told legal is like we're either cops or janitors. We're either here to stop you from doing something, or we're here to clean up a mess. So.
And different studios have different cultures around
Yeah.
this. In a lot of studios, people are in the forums. People are reading your Discord
yes,
messages.
yes.
People are reading your tweets. People are really actively consuming this information, but it's very hard to give individualized responses to all of that. So quantity is its own quality in a certain sense. There are also studios that are deeply dysfunctional about the feedback process. I worked at a company, I will not name it, whose president would have like one-on-one chats with all the new hires and give that new hire their opinion and then go tell that person to go talk to the design team. So he wouldn't have his fingerprints on the feedback. It was as awful as it was obvious.
Yeah, I think with feedback, in terms of like giving it to us and you wanting to give it to the right people, it doesn't mean adding the CEO of whoever on Twitter, and I will call it Twitter. don't just at the personal accounts of the developers. It's actually not as effective as you think it is, and depending on how spicy it gets, then it gets to legal. How fun.
Yeah.
So similar to what we were just saying earlier, it is about, one, if you see a player feedback form, that means like we actively need some feedback about this, and we dive much more deeply into it because we're like, okay, this is the thing we're looking at. So that's a great thing. People will also post casually on social. Maybe you don't even tag us. Maybe you don't, like you just mentioned the game name casually. We do have usually tools that will scrape social media, the web, Reddit, whatever. We just cite YouTube sometimes for feedback. And the bot will be like, this is positive, this is neutral, this is negative. We sometimes get word clouds of like, okay, this is what people are talking about the most. So even if you're not directly speaking to us, like we still have our own ways of like, okay, we have a general sense of what people are talking about. And sometimes even in the back end of like the game, if for some games, not all, there's different tracking processes. So it's like, how many times has someone clicked this button and then gone to the right? Like we have little things that we can track when it comes to gameplay, and that also helps inform our decisions. So honestly, just kind of doing what you're doing is great. But honestly, if we put out a player support, like player feedback form, do that. And we also will usually have places like a bug report form. We'll usually try to direct people very specifically into places because that helps us track things way easier and we can quantify it better. We can get the info we need. The amount of times I've had people just, again, say like, I don't like this thing. And we're like, what thing? And they don't answer.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't know what this is. What do you want? So filling out the forms helps us way more because we're like, oh, they were on PC and this thing crashed and oh no. Anyways, yeah.
Among Us is broken.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Please fix it.
Saying I don't like the thing is a good way to make already anxious people more anxious.
Yes. The one thing I'll say is that if you're unsure how to give feedback, that's a great thing to ask us because we will absolutely tell you what avenue to take. You know, whether it's an email, whether it's a form, whether we've got a public Trello board, whether we're not going to ask you to submit a Jira ticket. Never engage with Jira if you don't have to. Don't learn it. Don't learn it. But that is a great question to always ask us, and we will always be happy to answer that. And sometimes you might go, but I don't want to send an email. And I get it. I don't want to send emails ever either. But genuinely, we do appreciate it, and we do appreciate people being polite and going, hey, instead of me @ing you or @ing a developer, like we were saying a moment ago, yeah, just ask us, what's the best way for me to give you feedback? We love that question. I love that question. Yeah.
I can tell you the worst ways to do it.
Yeah.
You know, with some of the worst ways. Like, don't look someone up on LinkedIn, find their employer, find that, or do a search on their personal email account and send it there. That's not a good way to send feedback for a game.
Coming up to somebody in a bar and saying, "Oh, you work at X company? Can I give you some feedback on this game? I am just trying to enjoy my dinner."
Yeah. Oh, that's not even the worst one, though. I told you about the Asheron's Call player gathering where I went to the bathroom between panels and somebody yelled over the stall door, "Can I ask you an Asheron's Call question while you are doing what you're doing?" And at that point, like, the line had already been crossed. I'm like, sure, dude, go ahead and ask your question. Never saw his face, couldn't pick him out of a lineup, and that'll live with me for the rest of my life.
Did that feature get added? Or?
Absolutely not. I don't. All right, let's get into the spicy bits here. So there's a lot of feedback that we can take, and there's some feedback that we legally cannot take. One of the more common types is just, do it like GameX does it. But when that starts getting into IP and copyright, Angelo, take us on a little tour.
Okay, I know this is not what you all signed up for, but here's a quick 30-second intro to IP law. Okay, I'm gonna draw 3 quick categories. First is copyright. This is how you protect something that you've created that you have a specific, the official term is fixed in a tangible medium. You've written it down, you've typed it out, you've painted something. You cannot copyright ideas. You can't just copyright the idea of farming game or throw a ball and catch a cute character, for example. Because even in recent times, there's an example of another game that may have done that exact thing that isn't the most popular one that you've heard of. You can protect ideas with a patent, but that's a much more involved process, and it's very rare to actually come up with that in the game industry. It happens once or twice, but and then there's trademark. There's the thing that you associate with who created this game or this character, right? It's a name, it's a logo, it's a character that's kind of become the poster child for it, and that's how we know who made that thing. So when we get feedback that says, why don't you just put this feature or this character that looks a lot like this, from another game, we have an allergic reaction to that. We can't just, again, you can't copyright an idea, but one of legal's jobs is also not just to, deal with contracts and lawsuits, it's also to prevent them. So even if so legally maybe we can do something. We don't always want to do that thing because it might still result in a lawsuit that we don't want to deal with. I think one of the examples you brought up was Zootopia. When Disney released Zootopia, they got sued by someone who said, that's my exact idea. I came up with that. And now you stole my idea. That was ultimately dismissed, but I think it took over 2 years of litigation. And I have an idea about a world where animals can talk.
Yeah.
The more specific you get, the more, the closer it is to what actually came out. But even if you're going to win that lawsuit, we want to avoid it. So if we get an idea like that, or if we get a pitch, first of all, don't send game pitches at all. Don't send,
Please don't send unsolicited ideas.
Yes, I have an idea that you should put in the game. Again, I think you mentioned feedback is a gift. Well, part of a gift is it is yours now. And it doesn't belong to you anymore. And so if that's something that we end up having to deal with later, like, oh, I sent you this. And so a lot of studios will have a policy, we will delete stuff like that sight unseen. We won't even read it because we don't want to deal with the possibility later that someone comes up to us and says, oh, I wrote that in a forum. I submitted this in a forum and I said, you should do this exact game idea, and then you did it. That's mine. You owe me.
So I think that being said, though, there are definitely tropes and genres and things, and Angelo mentioned you can't copyright an idea. So there are a lot of games that are clearly inspired by each other. There are a lot of games that, once they've innovated something in the industry, and a really good example is, I'm going to date myself significantly here, The Legend of Zelda, the Ocarina of Time, popularized Z-targeting, which is sort of never left at this point. So that's the kind of thing where, that mechanical thing, that does work in what we're doing. That kind of thing we can be inspired by and we can utilize in our gameplay because it's not an idea. It's not a character or a copyrighted storyline or something like that. It's kind of a mechanical instant. They can't copyright you doing this on a trigger.
It's an idea. It's a mechanic.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's the kind of thing where it's like, if you're saying, XYZ game did this with their controls that made them more playable, that might be one thing. But saying, can you put the Among Us beans in your game? Probably not, right? That's their...
You'll have to pitch that to Victoria.
Some people do it anyway. Some people just throw it in there, and then I'm like, great. And then they'll tell me, and I'm like, no, because then we have to...
I've seen you collecting some of that knockoff merch.
Oh my gosh. I'm not going to lie. I've wanted to just go to a panel dressed up in all Among Us knockoff merch and just be like, all right, let's go. I won't, though. I won't.
If you do that, and then you tell her, she has to tell me, or their equivalent of me. She has to. And then as soon as we find out, we have to do something about it.
Yeah.
Don't tell us.
Yeah, don't do it.
Don't
also
do it.
don't tell me. And also don't do it.
But it's an excellent point in that, you know, a lot of the things that people don't see behind the scenes as well is that people who own these beloved characters have a lot of conditions. And from a brand management perspective, we're sort of the custodians and, you know, keepers of things like that. So I have had the great fortune of working with some incredible IP holders like Disney, Nintendo. I won't go into the whole anecdote right now, but maybe ask me after the panel about how much ankle of Princess Peach should be visible at any one time. And I can give you a very detailed answer about that. Yeah. But it speaks to the sort of greater complexities around how we handle these things. So, for example, you know, a beloved character that you really appreciate, and if we're trying to do a crossover or anything like that, so I spent some time working on the Mario Rabbids Box of Hope games, to make a collaboration like that happen doesn't take days or weeks. It takes years and quite a lot of lawyers. So
The fact that Kingdom Hearts exists at all is a miracle.
The fact that more than one of them exists is a minor miracle.
Every time a new character gets added to Super Smash Brothers, I just want to pour one out for the Nintendo legal team, and I'm just like, what a victory.
Though I think we're all still crossing our fingers for Waffle House in Tekken.
Yeah, I'm voting for Waffle House.
He's aware of it.
Yeah.
It's on Twitter. He's good.
Yeah. So, you know, we have those hopes and dreams as well, like with Waffle House, but it does take such a long time and there are so many hoops to jump through. So when you guys, can you add this character? Can you do this crossover? It's never necessarily that we don't want to, but oh boy, it takes quite a lot of time and quite a lot of money, and video games are already quite expensive to develop already. So yeah, it's, you know, it's hard because we're all fans as well, and we want to see those things happen. So when we do see cool suggestions or we have them internally, there's always a discussion about, all right, how feasible is this?
Yeah, there's an anecdote about Fast and the Furious, right? That like The Rock has it in his contract that he can't lose a fight or something, or he can only get hit as many times as Vin Diesel does. So imagine how, I don't know, I've never worked for Nintendo, but imagine how they would feel about Mario and how what restrictions they would put on whenever Mario shows up in another game.
The answer is many.
Yes. Did you know, because Among Us does a lot of IP collaborations, and I've learned which characters are not allowed to be shot with a gun, unfortunately.
Yes.
So some collabs, people are like, this would be great. I'm like, I agree, but we can't kill them, so they can't be in the game, unfortunately. So, in my dreams.
Weird ones which you fell foul of, right? Like the Geneva Convention.
Oh, yeah. And then sometimes you break the Geneva Convention, which I guess isn't really, I mean, I guess it is actually a IP, copyright? You can't have the Red Cross in a game.
It's international law.
Yeah, it's international law.
So that actually did come up in Halo, I think, where the med packs had the Red Cross on it, which everyone would kind of associate with a health pack, but turns out
It just came up in Ghost. We just added a little pack on the back of our healers. I tweeted a picture of it. Our character artist, who's from Geneva, I got a great JIRA ticket that said, "No longer breaking Geneva Convention." I was like, bless.
Unfortunately, we broke it, and then we got a very, very stern letter being like, don't do that. And we're like, oh, okay, sorry.
on a related note, please stop posting military secrets in your game forums.
Yes.
We keep having to deal with this. And we're tired of getting these emails and letters from governments. Thank you.
There are a lot of invisible reasons why feedback may not go through, and these are a lot of them. There's also some very, very visible reasons. How does the studio ensure that feedback is representative of a broad portion of players so a few squeaky wheels, and that is the nicest way I can say that, don't end up with all of the airtime? Faye, kick us off, please.
Yeah, so we've talked a little bit about the different sources of where we pull feedback from. So those surveys that we send out in emails that typically get ignored or go to your spam folder, please take them. are one of the sources, and those are really helpful because those will typically go out to everybody who has signed up for a game, not just the people who are also in a Discord server or in a subreddit or following hashtags on Twitter or making YouTube videos, but all of those are different sources. The other source is the game itself. Victoria mentioned earlier that there are certain things that we can track in games, like how many times a button gets pushed, how many times somebody has run over here to go do this puzzle and then gone right to the next step to do the puzzle, or they've gone elsewhere and done another action. That's often data we can collect from various players. So what we're doing is really looking at different sources. And if we start hearing, especially from one source, a lot of loud feedback, positive or negative, one of the first things we're going to do is go check that against another source, usually the data we're getting from the game ourselves, and data that's coming from a much larger population as well. So those survey data, and then also going and looking at the game. And what this often does is it lets us try to track down the discrepancy. So if we're, I don't know, suddenly hearing from one source like, oh, we can't complete this puzzle, the next step can't be done, or we can't find it, and we go look at the game, and there are a lot of people who are managing to find the next step and complete the puzzle, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're wrong. It just means that we want to start to really dig into why and what's going on. So that feedback is important for helping us to try to smooth over a number of different experiences. But feedback comes from all over the place. And one of the most important things that you can do, like I said, we're going to keep coming back to the surveys, guys. They're so important. Please take the surveys. But also, that compared with the data that we're seeing in the game itself is really important to make sure that, like, what we're hearing, usually secondarily or even from third sources, is true.
And I just want to call out, trophies, achievements, all that kind of stuff, love them or hate them. They are another source of this data, whether or not you've realized it, where studios can look at, oh, hey, 90% of players have finished level 1, but only 10% have the achievement for finishing the game. So they can track that by just looking at the trophy data, achievement data.
Your completionist behavior is very interesting to us.
Yeah. Sometimes the best feedback you can give is just playing the game. We had a single dashboard for player health on the Lord of the Rings Online beta, and we noticed that there was a dip on that graph. And that's weird. People are really not having a great time during this tiny level band. Why is that? And we drilled in further. I'm like, okay, people are dying a lot just in these 2 levels of leveling up. That's weird. Who's dying? And we're able to go in. I'm like, oh, it's one specific class. One specific class is dying a lot in these 2 levels. And then we start asking questions like, are the skills broken? Like one of the skills they just got, is that a problem? No, all the skills are fine. And like, where are they dying? Because we can go 1 level deeper. Where are they dying? Well, there's 2 zones of approximately this level, and they're dying in one and they're not dying in the other. Okay, cool. Are the monsters statted wrong? It's weird that it would only affect 1 class. So we go even further, and then we get to the point where we have no idea, and we just found a member of that class, it was the Archer class, and we went in as an invisible admin, and we followed them around for a day. And we waited for them to die, and they did. And what happened was they just got a brand new, big, high damage, long cooldown AoE attack that they were using as their opener for pulling monsters. And this area had these big trees that should have blocked the volley of arrows from hitting the 3 orcs on the other side of the tree, but the trees were set up wrong. So the arrows were able to aggro the 3 orcs on the other side of the tree that you didn't see, then you'd be fighting 4 orcs and you would die. No player ever reported this. No individual player really ever knew what was wrong, but by playing the game, honestly and often, these bits of feedback emerge, and we were able to fix the tree model that had a checkbox missing. It was really that simple at the end of the day.
Yeah.
The lesson is you're being watched.
Oh, you're absolutely being watched. Like, I've had so many players say, oh, I did this, and this didn't work, and I didn't get the drop I was supposed to get, and we check the logs like, no, you didn't.
Okay. That just reminds me of something whenever someone complains on a forum about, why did I get banned? I didn't do anything wrong. And then you just we have logs. You got like you just see what they were doing at the time. They have like 6 cheat programs running that we can very clearly see. I'm like, well,
Brand appeals. My brother was using my computer.
oh yeah,
Never heard that one before. Okay.
kinda, yeah. It's still on you.
My favorite is when someone tries to lie and they're like, well, I didn't do anything. And I can look back at their chat logs and like, screenshot, I think you said this. They're like, I did deserve that. You're right.
You got me.
Like, you've created new slurs. What have you?
New ones.
That is the worst job in the game industry, by the way. It's updating your banned strings list, because all those new things you have to put on the list are things people actually said.
Sure, I feel like a terrible person every time I type them out. I'm like, oh no, I'm horrible.
Yeah.
But getting back closer to the core of the question,
Right.
like how do people figure out the core of player sentiment beyond the squeaky wheels? Because there's often an impression that like, oh, well, Reddit is very negative, or oh, our Discord is very negative, but people are having more fun in the game. Are they?
One of the things that Victoria mentioned before was sort of looking at player feedback in the broader sort of context of different social media platforms. So my time at Ubisoft, I used to spend an awful long time looking at what we call player sentiment reports. And so we would take samples of comments from our own channels, from things like subreddits. Each platform, interestingly, has its own negativity weighting.
Yeah.
So if anybody is into like statistical analysis, I won't go into it for those who aren't, but we give each platform a weight as to what the common level of negativity is on each one. So I will say, we can probably say through actual math that Reddit is the worst. There's math that backs it up. I'm sorry, anybody who's a Redditor, but there is math that backs up that Reddit is really the worst place and the most negative place. And then, you know, you can look at places like Twitter, which are sort of middling. You'd probably be shocked to know, actually, maybe it's worse these days. And then, you know, Facebook, which everybody has forgotten, and that's fine. Needs to die. And things like Instagram as well has a different weighting because it's a different kind of content. So when we look at collating all of that feedback, because we tend to try and make it as anonymized as possible as well. So we're really just looking at like the pure context of words, and also understanding that in modern language, when sometimes you use the F word, it can be a good thing. And so the way that we gather sentiment has changed as language changes as well. So that's generally the best way for us to get a really good baseline of like unbiased feedback. But also understanding the sort of thing that happens with restaurant reviews is that often you'll only mostly see negative ones, because the way that we're wired as people is that we are more than happy to complain about a bad experience, but we rarely talk about good ones. So, yeah.
The social platforms comment is always funny to me, because oftentimes like you have to update your tracking for new slang and new words, and this also means that you sometimes then have to explain those phrases to your boss. When they come to you and they say, what does it mean that someone called our NPC a brat? And you have to say, no, they didn't call her a brat. They called her brat. It's different.
All right. Positive or negative, what is the best way to communicate intensity? If you feel very, very strongly about it, it's very, very important to you that people get some feedback, what is the best way to make that happen?
Make it all the way up to legal. Let's go.
Please don't. Yeah, again, that the intensity, you know, we appreciate people being very passionate about a game, but I think sometimes that can skew both ways, right? Positive or negative.
I mean, I think you can say, I feel strongly about this in the feedback you send us, and that's probably the best way to do it. Oftentimes, the same software that we use to kind of scrape data from social sites and things like that kind of helps to sort of balance the the emotional weighting as well, especially if it skews negative. There's just sort of a mental toll that kind of comes with reading a ton of really upset comments about things. Even if you know the thing that they're talking about is true and you agree with them, you can kind of just get to this point where you're like, yeah, bummer.
Yeah, I mean,
I need
often
to lie down.
we know our game. We know what's
Yeah, we know what's
what
broken.
what we want to. Yeah, exactly.
We do.
We know there are areas that we want to work on, and usually it's budget or timing or whatever. But to hear this onslaught of negativity about something
Yeah.
can be kind of draining.
And I think the thing that I want to make clear is in those social channels, like we expect there to be a lot of emotion. We're not trying to, I don't want to tell you like don't be emotional in your spaces and things like that. That's fine. It's when that starts to kind of get sent to the personal accounts or, posted the same copy pasta every single day in a Discord server, that starts to kind of be a little bit more difficult to work around. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I think of it like we're all well calibrated now to defend ourselves against the rage economy. So that really doesn't make its way through to us. We kind of go, okay, they'll come back when they can articulate what they're thinking, but we don't absorb the all caps. So really your best bet is to try and differentiate yourself from that kind of tone. And I feel like if you're here at this panel, you're probably not the kind of person to do that. But, pass it along. Pass it along.
Yeah. Tell your friends.
Tell your friends.
Remember that.
Tell your enemies.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Yes.
especially your enemies. I mean, remind yourself. Well, reminder that there are people reading these comments, and every piece of feedback, every forum post, every tweet. I can't even. Well, maybe not. Is being read by a human.
Yeah.
But like, if you wouldn't say it to your mum, if you like your mum, you probably shouldn't.
I will say, I think like if we were to talk about, if you want to communicate the intensity of something, just like we said, just you don't need to use all caps, you don't need to do the mob, you don't need to do the daily posting. I usually just mute people who do the daily posting, and then they don't get hurt at all. But I have never felt more bad than when someone has been who's super supportive, and they're like, I understand it's really difficult. This thing just made me really sad. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. We're the worst people in the world. We'll change it immediately. Okay, we don't actually do that. But that's like, it's when you understand, it's like, hey, I don't really know what goes on, but this was really disappointing to me. Like, oh, that just, that hits so hard.
I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed.
Yeah.
It's the worst.
Sorry.
It's the worst. So what are some considered ways to offer that critical or negative feedback? When you do have it and you care about the people, say, up on this panel, for instance, please, what are some good ways to communicate that? Lisa, do you want to start us off?
So I will refer back to the previous slide a little bit. Please don't start a change.org petition. Not helpful. It's a legal construct for government things. We can't do anything with that. But I think I alluded to it before. If you're not sure, ask us. We usually have a dedicated Twitter account. Like, Ubisoft has Ubisoft at support. They are great people. Customer service teams are great people. They help us gather stuff and then send it to us in a big old lump where we go, oh, look, it is a gift. Like you said before, thank you for our lovely, if slightly terrifying gift, depending on how good or bad or whatever things are going. Official channels are always the correct way to do it. I've worked with some incredible developers over the years who are happy to be receptive on their personal accounts to things like feedback, but I personally will always recommend to people use official social media channels, look at websites, see if there's a contact us section. We usually have a form, we usually have an email. That's literally the best way. We've said don't look us up on LinkedIn. LinkedIn's a trash fire anyway. But I feel like a broken record, but it's like use official channels, help us help you. All of the tools are there usually, and if they're not, like I said before, just ask us. You're like, actually, there's nowhere for me to submit this. And we go, you know what? That's a great point. we'll create a form for that, or like, you know, maybe we'll set something up in a Discord. Maybe there's you know, submit a bug section. So if the tools don't exist, tell us the tools don't exist, because we'll be like, oh, that's great. That's a great piece of feedback that we can enact right now, so that then you can give us the rest of the feedback.
Yeah. I think if you're also in a space like a Discord server and the devs are more present, or you've been playtesting and you manage to get into a room where the whole studio of all 10 people sits down and goes, so, what'd you think? And you do want to give some feedback that, like, maybe you didn't enjoy something as much, or maybe you didn't feel like this worked as well. Just remember, you know, there's another person, Angelo said this before, there's another person on the side of that screen, and they're prepared for you to not have liked things. But delivering critical feedback with empathy to the person who made it is sort of an important thing, just because, you know, we're in games because we wanted to make games for people. Like, we're here because we really like video games and board games, and we had fun playing them, and we got excited about something and said, I want to make something for a ton of other people to play too. And
nobody wants to make a bad game.
nobody wants to make a bad game. This is
Wait, what if I want to
here.
make a bad game? I hate video games. Confirmed.
She wants to make a bad game.
Victoria wants to make a bad game.
Nobody else wants to make a bad game.
One quote
Wait, no.
Yeah.
I regret this.
I'm gonna tweet it right now.
Victoria Tran wants to make a bad game. No, in general, yeah, we're all working in this industry because we love games and we want to make, you know, the best games we can. So we want to hear this, but I guess, I mean, I have done this before, I swear. Like, not to get too introspective on a, you know, PAX panel about video game feedback, but think about how you like to get feedback on things. Like, think about how you like to get constructive criticism and what works for you and what doesn't, right? Like, if someone says something a certain way to you, does it rub you the wrong way? And you just, well, now I'm going to do the opposite.
Now I will not do it.
Yeah. Or, you know, like, oh, okay, that was really thoughtful. Thank you. I actually will consider that.
Social media was a mistake. And as soon as you stop seeing another person's face, our brains are hardwired to treat that entity on the other side of the connection as less than human, which is not always the case.
Now with AI, it is sometimes the case.
All right. With that, we're going to take the last several minutes here and turn things over to you. It's a panel about feedback, so you can give us some feedback. You can ask us some questions. If you have more of a comment than a question, you can tweet that at us or not. And we would love to hear from you. Nobody ever wants to be the
In this
first.
microphone.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, just head on over to the
Hopefully,
microphones.
I
Line
love
up.
the
Oh, no,
No
it's
elbows.
support
close.
people can turn
gosh.
some of them on. Queue up, everybody.
I'm gonna lay down. Hello. Quick context. So I do research in virtual reality at a nearby
Awesome.
university.
Awesome.
So when we do anything that involves data from people, we have to get an IRB approval for that, right?
Yeah.
So I'm curious, when you're doing any kind of structured feedback that you're collecting, what is the process like? Do you have to go through legal counsel? Do you have any kind of third parties that you work with to get approval on like the ethics of whatever you're collecting?
This sounds like it's for you.
Oh, well, I
Angelo.
mean, I deal with part of that, which is, you know, okay, here's the form that they need to sign. You are granting us consent to use this data for this purpose. You know, we're very transparent about that.
That's what those terms of services are that nobody reads, and you just scroll to the bottom. Yeah.
Well, I mean, there was ethics in there too. I don't know. I mean, that's not something, like, are we dropping someone in a hamster wheel? Like, that's not.
I mean, I could think of a couple games that are like that. I think, I don't know if the ethics side of it has come up as much for us because we're not considering what we're doing to be experimenting for science.
Well, I guess so. Specifically, like in the case of virtual reality, if you're making
Yeah.
games, there's an actual risk that someone could get injured when they're in a play test or something. I'm wondering if that applies to the kind of development.
Well, I think from the legal standpoint, we would just have to be really, really clear up
Yeah.
front that
Yeah.
they know what they're getting themselves into, what could happen,
Yeah.
what the risk is, and that they're signing up for it with that in mind.
Yeah, I think we spend a lot of time setting expectations in playtests, like there will be bugs, this will break. It's not about, bumping into the corner of your desk.
I thought you meant
whole
there
lot-
will be bugs, like there will be insects. Like
No.
if you are
That-
afraid of
that-
insects,
Sometimes.
don't.
Why is it always spiders?
Yeah.
That's why you need the slider.
So we do try to make sure we have a lot of clear disclaimers and, opt-in screens, like Faye was saying, but not as much worrying about their personal safety, hopefully.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there, sometimes that comes up with things like a
We do
flashing
do a
screen.
lot of compliance works, things like epilepsy disclaimers, GDPR, which is obviously a little more relevant in Europe and a little bit in California.
Or everywhere. Though.
Yeah. So there are huge compliance considerations, especially when you're dealing with people who are under a certain age, that kind of thing. So yes, not necessarily in the physical space, but with like VR, but those are all things that we have to think about, especially when we're doing testing or just letting people sign up for a game, especially if there's any account creation involved, that kind of thing.
Yeah, just back to that repetition.
Yeah.
A lot of paperwork, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, we'll throw things to the other side.
Thanks, this was really interesting. You mentioned Reddit as the most negative channel for feedback. Is there a most positive channel for feedback, or maybe even more usefully, a most useful channel for feedback?
They are all useful in their own way. So even though Reddit skews negative, those are very passionate people who are writing paragraphs, dissertations. I want, some of them are so well written, I want those people to submit them to academic bodies. I'm like, go get your PhD. Those are incredible. So they're all useful in their own way. In terms of positivity, Lisa managed the Yelp review effect earlier, which is this idea that when we are negatively primed, we're more likely to go on and kind of type out a big review. Whereas if we're more positively primed, if we had a more positive experience, we're just going to kind of sit and enjoy that and not tell anybody about it. So.
I will say Ryan Rigney of Push to Talk newsletter recently noted YouTube as the one that had the most diversity in the kinds of feedback is collected because you're getting so many different types of audiences. I think that was like 2 or 3 weeks ago he published that, so might have more information there.
One rule of thumb is the more friction there is on a platform to give the feedback, the more negative it tends to be because you have to do more work to do it. If you're in the game taking a survey, that's the least amount of friction, tends to be the most positive. If you have to go into Reddit, that's something you generally do on a PC, so that's a lot of friction. Discord or a tweet might be something you do on the phone, which is somewhere in between, or Instagram might be somewhere in between. So kind of rule of thumb for the negativity slider.
Yeah. It's also important to understand that negativity isn't inherently bad.
Correct.
It just means that we absorb the information slightly differently. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, to the other side.
I'm all alone over here. You guys can come over here if you want. Anyway, hello, my name is Mason. This is a question for my fellow community managers.
Hello.
I know this is more towards game feedback and stuff like that, but in terms of community and stuff like that, when you're doing events for Discord and stuff like that, I'm curious how you guys measure the success of how well an event did or what events players want to see.
I feel like I've hopped in a lot. Any other community people want to take this one first?
Yeah, I feel like your voice chat is so active. I kind of look to you for.
Yeah.
So, sorry, is it specifically Discord events or just events in general?
Even if, outside of Discord's fine too, just events for your games.
I mean, it depends. It always depends, right? So usually with any event, with any campaign that you do, you have certain things. You're like, is it that I want player engagement to be the top? And you have your key performance indicator that is okay, hopefully we hit this, let's say. Or maybe it's I just want to attract the most new players into this event, and then you would track those. So it's kind of hard to say. Again, you would talk to whoever is a stakeholder in this sort of thing, or maybe it's just you, and determine, okay, what does a successful event look like to me, and what does that look like to the game, and how does it align with the priorities of the studio? So it's a half real answer, I guess. It's hard to give you actual things.
I would agree with that though. You come up with the metrics and then see if you can hit those. But RSVPs, number of attendees, how much they engaged, are pretty bread and butter.
And did they do the thing that the event was about, or did they just show up?
We do when they do the things.
When they do the
They
thing.
do the thing I asked
We
them.
do solicit feedback for that kind of stuff afterwards as well.
Oh, yeah.
Understanding people's experience after the fact given this is about feedback, is super, super important as well. So
Please
on
stay
top
on
of
the
all of
line
those
for a
business
short
metrics,
survey.
it's like people feedback metrics also good.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And then one last thing for Nick and Jackie. What is your Twitter handles? I couldn't find them.
That's intentional.
Sorry.
I actually don't have one on
law.
purpose,
Okay, no
yeah.
worries then. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not active.
Hi there. I was just wondering, so with all the data you've been talking about with spaces, just types of feedback, how big of a role does like a QA person, a stats person, just data people in general, how big a role do they play in these findings?
So good news, bad news. Good news, very big, and I think we'll be happy to talk about that. Bad news, I have to be a big meanie face
I get it.
and cut off the Q&A at this point. We're going to stick around for a little bit afterwards. If there are some people that had questions that we didn't get to, please find us. I mean, while we're here, don't follow us home. And with that, we have hit our time. Thank you for coming. A round of applause for our panelists and for yourselves. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
But you have to leave now.
Thank you, guys.
A big shout out to my beautiful wife in the back, taking care of my two kids so that I could be up here speaking.